There is a variety of flare tools: manual, hydraulic, and even a pneumatic tool. The Flareforce produces on-the-fly flares with no loose parts and no need for a vise. The Flareforce self-centers over the tube to provide accurate flares. A quick release allows easy insertion and removal of tubing, and the one-handed operation with the trigger control allows flaring on tubing that's already installed on the chassis. The Flareforce is a shop-grade tool designed for shops that do repair and service work on brakes. The Flareforce can make a flare in less than 10 seconds. Pneumatic, Flareforce produces flares right on the vehicle. Single, double, inverted, and bubble ISO flares are possible. There is a method for quick changing the tube size, and the tool is a single-handed operation. Flareforce will work with 3/16 inch, 1/4 inch, 5/16 inch, and 3/8 inch tubing. The Flareforce tool will flare steel and NICOP tubing. The Flareforce tool will also work with copper, aluminum, and brass. Like any shop-grade pneumatic tool, setting up the Flareforce begins with the use of grease. For pneumatic jaws and pressure, we elected to use the same Bosch grease used on rotary hammers and motors. The jaws and collar are subjected to pneumatic force, much like an impact driver. With proper care, this shop-grade tool will last for many years. The tool is designed to produce repeatable flares. These popular sizes include 3/16 inch, 1/4 inch, 5/16 inch, and 3/8 inch to accommodate US brake tubing, fuel lines, and transmission cooling lines. Here, the jaws for 3/16 inch tubing are set up with grease and springs. Changing out jaws can be done quickly if tubing changes from one size to another. The Flareforce tool creates 3 OE-style flares: the single flare, which is not for brake systems, the double or inverted flare, and bubble or ISO flares. These jaws and pneumatic tool work on steel lines, poly armor, or similar coated lines, NICOP nickel copper, copper, and aluminum lines. Quite often, 3/16 inch accommodates 4.75 mm metric outside diameter, and the 1/4 inch jaws accommodate 6 mm outside diameter metric tubing. These precision parts go together easily, and the outside lockdown ring is threaded into place before using the tool. Here, the Flareforce pneumatic tool is set up for a 3/16 inch outside diameter brake tubing. The tool is now ready to use. The air supply line is a standard 1/4 inch national pipe thread to accommodate a variety of nipple sizes. There are 2 die slides included with the flare tool. This die slide is for the 3/16 inch tubing and uses 2 dies. The 2 dies are marked as 3/16 inch. The dies form the initial flare and the inverted flare. The initial flare forms the ISO bubble flare, and the inverted flare die also forms a single flare. A plastic loader tool helps insert the slide. There is a trip lever release for the slide. This slide works with 3/16 inch dies. The other slide and dies work with 1/4 inch, 5/16 inch, and 3/8 inch. Open the jaws to accept tubing. There is a toggle switch for opening and closing the jaws, and a tubing stop reset lever for holding the tube in the right position with relationship to the dies. Simply squeeze the trigger and pull the reset lever up into position, release the trigger, and the tubing stop stays in place. This step is performed with the jaws in the closed position. Tubing is prepared in the usual manner. Cutting requires deburring and chamfering of the edges. Miller's red rubber grease is applied to reduce friction in the dies. Miller's red rubber grease is caster-based and will not harm brake seals or rubber parts. This grease will reduce the risk of friction. Any red rubber grease residue left will not damage brake parts. Similarly, denatured alcohol can be used for cleaning brake parts. DOT2 and earlier brake fluid was alcohol and castor oil to protect rubber seals and rubber cups. Some lubricate dies and brake flaring adapters with either brake fluid or an assembly fluid like hydraulic brake cylinder assembly fluid from Raybestos, which is also harmless to rubber. Never use petroleum-based or mineral-based products to clean around brake hydraulic cylinders and rubber parts. Petroleum distillates and petroleum-based products will cause rubber to swell and fail. The die slide extends to the left side. Rocker switch in the closed position. The trigger can be pulled to enable locking of the tube stop. Release the trigger and the tube stop knob stays in place. Now the rocker switch can be moved to the open position. Here, the jaws are set in the open position. To begin the inverted flare process, the die slider faces to the left of the tool. The jaw toggle switch is moved to the closed position. Again, the process begins by pulling the trigger, pulling up the reset knob and releasing it, and moving the toggle to the open jaw position. The D-bird tubing can now be inserted. Make sure the tube engages the pin on the number 1 die. Holding the trigger for 1 to 2 seconds makes the number 1 or bubble flare portion of an inverted flare. Move the die slide over and hold the trigger down 1 to 2 seconds to make the inverted second flare. Now move the toggle switch to the open position to release the tube and newly formed flare. Rock the tube to dislodge the jaws. Remove the tube carefully to prevent nicking the flare on the jaw teeth. The Flareforce tool is capable of forming optimal flare seats and laps. The double inverted flare lap is uniform with a narrow margin that looks exactly like a machine-formed lap. The seat is perfectly shaped with the double lap meeting the inside diameter edge to form a machine-quality double inverted flare. The smooth seat can be used as is or polished lightly with Scotch-Brite. All cleaning should be done with denatured alcohol, which has no impact on the rubber parts inside the braking system. Dry compressed air can blow off any remaining alcohol and dry the tubing. If tube cutting and flaring is performed on the vehicle, be certain to use a vacuum bleeder to draw brake fluid through the line and remove any debris from the cutting or flaring process. Metal debris can damage rubber seals and vital brake components. Quality brake tubing is also available from AGS Company. Coiled tubing should be straightened before double flaring or flaring the ends. This SUR&R tubing straightening tool is cost-effective and does a quality job. For a lower volume or under chassis tool, this is a cost-effective solution. With little effort and proper manipulation of the tool, the tubing is now straight and ready for flaring. The SUR&R tool is available online. This one was purchased from Summit Racing. This Rigid 15SI tubing cutter has ball bearing rollers. True alignment is assured, and this cutter will cut through stainless steel. The only drawback with this type of cutter is it does not have the recess for cutting just the end off an existing flare. There are tubing cutters for flared tubing that do have a recess to enable cutting off just the end. This OTC mini cutter is one example. Under the chassis, this is a much more versatile tool. Once deburred, the tubing can be greased with red rubber grease before beginning the flaring process. Once again, this caster-based grease will not damage rubber parts. After cleanup, any remaining red rubber grease will not harm the internal parts of the hydraulic brake system. As a first step, close the jaws. While applying 90 psi air force, pull the trigger, lift up on the tube stop knob, release the trigger, and switch the toggle over to open position. Note that the tube stop is up and locked before inserting the tube. The die slide is to the left, the first die, or bubble flare. After holding the trigger down for 1 to 2 seconds, the bubble flare has been formed. If making a bubble flare, this is where the process would end. Open the jaw carefully and remove the tubing without damaging the edges. This is a functional ISO bubble flare nicely formed. To form the 45-degree inverted flare, the tube would be left in the tool. Flip the tool to the second die position and squeeze the trigger. Remove the tube carefully. Note that this is a nicely formed inverted 45-degree double flare. The biggest plus with the Flareforce tool is its ability to make repeatable flares. Jaw marks on the sides of the tube behind the flare can be smoothed with Scotch-Brite fine pad. Assuming you're using quality tubing, there is enough electroplated zinc coating to withstand polishing the tube with Scotch-Brite. AGS Company makes quality tubing in 28,000-inch wall thickness to replace original equipment steel tubing. Once again, the tubing stop is set and the jaws are open to receive the tubing. In this case, the die slide is to the right and a single flare can be formed. With a rocker switch in the open position, rock the tube to release the jaws. Remove the tube carefully. This is a single flare, which would not be used for brake line. Again, we set the toggle switch in the closed position to lock in the knob for the tubing stop. The die slider is facing to the left for the first die, or first step in an inverted flare. Squeezing the trigger for 1 to 2 seconds with this 3/16" tubing will set the inverted flare. Flip the die to the right side and again squeeze the trigger. Hold for 1 to 2 seconds. Now open the jaws. Rock the tubing to dislodge it from the jaws. And there again is a perfectly formed inverted double 45-degree flare. We'll repeat this process once more with the objective of making a 45-degree double inverted flare. Note the sequence and the quality of the repeatable 45-degree double inverted flare. In a service environment beneath the chassis trying to get the job done, this is crucial, as you only have so much brake line and time to get this job right. Make sure the tubing is flush against the die and centered on the die pin. These steps go quickly once the Flareforce tool operator has practiced this procedure. When the tubing stop has been set properly and the tube is inserted to set on the dies properly, it takes a matter of seconds to produce this single and then the double flare. This seat can be used as is, though polishing with Scotch-Brite is often advisable. See the other videos in this series for more details on tubing preparation and how to finish tubing after flaring. For the shop engaged in utility work, our choice would be the Flareforce tool for pneumatic, fast, repeatable, professional level flares.